Good evening, guys, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a minute, but we are back. First off, thank you all of you for all of the support and awesome comments that the channel has been receiving. Even after not posting anything for a little over 2 months now, we have reached 1,000 subscribers, so really awesome stuff. A lot of cool opportunities were presented to me because of you guys, so I just want to say thank you so much for the continued support. Today we're going to be continuing on with a new series, basically the same as before, just titling it differently so certain people will shut their mouths. But we're just going to call it Flying with Overkill. And we're going to start that out with the F-18C today. It's still going to be the same thing and be doing tutorials, just I don't always teach exactly by the book, don't exactly teach the step-by-step instructions how they would do it in the real world. As I said when I started this channel, my goal is to get people who are new to DCS or new to a specific plane, who may not have all the background information as an aviator. Hell, I don't even have most of it. Up in the air and be able to enjoy DCS World and enjoy the sim and fly with their buddies and still be able to compete without having all of the step-by-step stuff memorized, or just those who don't really want to do everything step-by-step as a real aviator and just want to get up and fly. So, Flying with Overkill F-18C, there's going to be two different ways that we're going to be doing this. So obviously first I'm going to be doing the tutorials as I've done with all the other aircraft, and then also I am a co-founder of Virtual Care Wing 13. You can find us at vcw13.com, and every week we do training sessions, and I'm going to start recording the trainings with the squadron so you guys can hear different perspectives, hear the feedback from the other flight members. As I said, I don't know everything, so they tend to be really good about chiming in whatever I miss. And you guys get to be a part of that, and hopefully that'll increase decrease the learning time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the seat here, and let's get started. As usual, we're just going to start with a quick cockpit tour, and then the next video we'll get into startup, taxi, and takeoff. Alright, so we're going to come down here, starting with the right panel here. I'll try to lock the screen as we go. If I don't go into a lot of detail about something, it is because it's not particularly required. It's not something that we use in DCS, so don't sweat it on that one right there. So starting back here, we have our INS rotary dial, and the INS rotary is used to align the INS, or initial navigation system. So in order to align when you're on the carrier, you would set it to CV. When on the ground, you'd set it here to ground. Once the alignment's complete, you'll move it over here to nav. If for any reason you lost alignment while in flight, just below nav there is another setting for IFA, or in-flight alignment. You would switch it over there to IFA, wait for it to align, and then switch it back to nav. Coming up here, we have our FLIR, or forward-looking infrared sensor switch. Then we have our LTDR, or laser target designator range switch. And then finally we have LST NFLIR switch, or laser spot tracker navigation forward-looking infrared sensor. Okay, now that's a mouthful there. Coming up to the next panel, we have our lighting controls. So first we have our lighting mode, which starts in day, then night, and NVG. Night and NVG will reduce the brightness and clarity of the screens and displays based on whichever mode you select. So if you're using night vision goggles, obviously bring it all the way forward, and if you're just flying at night, you can switch it to the night mode and make some of the displays easier to read. We have our chart or kneeboard light, our warning caution light, our light test switch, the consoles. So consoles are going to be like, for example, this is a console, and there's another one on the opposing side, and the instrument panel is going to be up front. Then we have our floodlights. Coming up, we have our bleed air control. We have our anti-ice switches, so the pitot heat and the engine anti-ice. Then we have our cockpit environment controls. You have cabin pressure, temperature, and your different modes for the ram air. We have our left generator, right generator, and battery switch. If we were to move up a bit here, we have our avionics cooling switch, our warning panel, our wing fold lever. So to use the wing fold lever, we'll mouse wheel back to release it, left click to fold the wings up, right click to spread them out, and then mouse wheel forward to lock them into position. We have our resting hook handle, down for down, up for up, our hydraulic pressure in pounds per square inch at 1,000 pounds. We have our radar altimeter, setting the radar altimeter in hundreds of feet. Once you can use your mouse wheel here to set the desired altitude, and once the aircraft falls beneath the set altitude, so in this case 200 feet, you'll get an audible warning. Okay, we'll go over that more during the startup. Coming up here, we have our standby indicator. So we have our vertical velocity indicator. This tells you whether the aircraft is increasing or decreasing altitude. Your standby altimeter, you can set the altimeter pressure here with this knob. You get the altimeter pressure from the briefing. Then we have the standby indicated airspeed, showing airspeed in hundreds of knots per hour. We have our standby ADI, or attitude director indicator, showing the pitch and roll of the aircraft in relationship to the horizon. We have our EWR, early warning radar display. Let's go ahead and back up here just a bit. Let me adjust the camera zoom. And we can remove the stick by left clicking at the base, and you can do the same thing, bring it back. But in this case, we want to remove it. Let me get to a reasonable position here and lock it. There we go. Okay, so starting up here at the right, we have our HMD, or helmet mounted display. Rotate the knob to turn it on, and then increase the brightness from there forward. And then we have our IR cooling switch, which begins the cooling process for the AIM-9 Seeker, which we'll go into more in the air-to-air combat portions. This guy right here, right where my mouse is, the screen's a little too far over, but there is a magnetic compass there if you need to use it. You have our left and right DDIs, or digital display indicators, powered on with the two knobs above. They have both day and night mode. You have the buttons that are surrounding them called OSBs. OSB 1 starting here, going around to OSB 20. Okay, coming up here we have the up front controller. Okay, you'll be in this guy quite a bit. Excuse me. Here we have our ADF switch, setting the ADF modes to channel 1 or channel 2. You obviously have your keypad, you have the main UFC digital display, and then you have your subsystem option displays with the corresponding option buttons here down the middle here. You have your UFC brightness knob. Okay, and then we have our volume controls for radios 1 and 2, radio selectors 1 and 2. You can roll the wheels forward to cycle through the preset channels or go into manual mode. You can also just type in your radio frequencies manually and hit enter once you've got the desired frequency. Then you have your subsystem controllers here. So we have autopilot, IFF, identify friend or foe, your TACAN, your ICLS, your data link, your radar beacon, and the on-off switch for some of the certain subsystems. For example, the TACAN, ILS, and data link. You will definitely need to hit the on and off to use them. Below that, we have our HUD control. So here we have our reject switches, so reject 1 and 2. Reject 1 will remove much of the symbology, and reject 2 will remove most of the information from the HUD and get it down to the bare minimum. To bring the HUD up, you have your brightness knob here. Simply moving it up turns the HUD on, and then the further over you go, obviously increases the brightness. HUD has a day and night mode. You have a black level adjuster here, although I haven't found that it actually does anything. You have your HUD video controller, which isn't currently modeled. The balance here is used to increase or decrease the stroke on the text for the HUD, although again I haven't found that it actually does anything. You have your AOA indexer brightness control, which the AOA indexer can be found right here, and we'll go into more of that when we go into the landing portion of the tutorials. Okay, so coming back down, there we go. Then we have our altimeter switch, by default set in barometric pressure. Flip the switch down and you're into radar altimeter, and that's what the HUD will display. And then this guy, we again don't ever actually use it, so I'm not going to worry about that one. And in the center here we have our AMPCD, or Advanced Multi-Purpose Color Display. You have your heading selector, and then we'll go into this when we get into autopilot, which allows you to set a desired heading for the autopilot. And then you have your course reference, which you can set a specific course reference to a TACAN track, which again we'll go into obviously later. And then again, same controls that you found up here on the DDIs as far as the OSBs. Okay, coming up to the top here, you have your master caution button here, and I'm clicking on it. I don't know if you guys can see that real well in the recording, but you can click on it. It will illuminate master caution when a master caution is available. You also have different indicators here that will populate based on different conditions for the aircraft, which we'll be able to see what those look like when we go into the startup and do the lamp test. Okay, over here we have our fire extinguisher control switch. We have our air-to-air mode and air-to-ground mode. Select the button to put yourself into that mode, press it again to remove it, to put you back into navigation, your master arm switch directly below, and your emergency jettison switch. Sorry about that, I had to clear my throat there. Coming down here, we have the IFE panel. Here's the IFE brightness knob, although I haven't ever found that the brightness knob actually does anything. On the IFE system, or integrated fuel and engine indicators, we have on the left panel is all the engine readouts. You have left and right engine. Starting at the top, you'll have your RPMs, engine temperature, and then your fuel flow in hundreds of pounds per hour. And then down here, we'll have two gauges that will give us the exhaust nozzle position, so it tells us how open or closed the exhaust nozzles at the back of plane are. And then finally down here, we'll have our oil pressure in pounds per square inch. We have different mode buttons here for the IFE panel. Up here, we'll have the fuel indicators and readouts. So at the top, you'll have the total fuel on board, which will have a number followed by a T, and then you'll have the internal fuel tank directly below it with a number followed by an I. Then you'll be able to set your bingo fuel, and then down here we'll have you have a time, which you can change the zone to Zulu or local, and then you have basically a stopwatch that you can reset. Here we have our jettison select station, so you can either select the center, left inboard, right inboard, left outboard, right outboard for your stores. Okay, and then you would go through the jettison cycle, which again we'll learn later. So coming down here, let's move on down a little bit. There we go. So stepping on down here, we have our landing gear handle. We have our launch bar switch, which obviously the launch bar would be used when you're getting ready to hook up to the catapult and launch off the deck. You have your flap control switch, our selective jettison knob, and then the jettison push button. Your taxi light, your anti-skid. For the anti-skid switch, you'll always want to make sure it's on when you're on the ground, off when you're on the carrier. We have our parking brake here. To release the parking brake, a simple left click. To bring it back up, left click again, and mouse wheel back. You have your wheel brake pressure, your hook bypass. The hook bypass will be used when you are on landing. When you're approaching your landing, if you're landing on the carrier, you want to make sure it's in carrier. When you're landing on ground, you'll set it up to field. You have your fire test switch, your ground power control switches, your formation lights, your position lights, your strobe light. Strobe is set to bright, then off and dim. I leave mine in the bright position. Your GenTie control switch, the only reason I'm going to show you guys this one is there's on occasion that you may get a GenTie warning on the warning panel over on the right side. And if you do, you simply need to bring the cover up, set it to reset, bring it back down to GenTie control, and close the cover again. And that'll clear that warning. Alright, moving back further here. Up here we have our emergency dispense switch for the countermeasures. Back here we have our APU switch. You have your fuel probe extend switch, emergency probe and then emergency extend, then extend. You have your external wing tank control switches and your centerline fuel tank control switch. You have your fuel dump. This will be important when making sure the aircraft's at the correct weight before landing. You have your FCS or flight computer control system or flight control system reset switch. Here you have your rudder trim that can be turned or left or right, and then the little button up on top of it is your takeoff trim. So you simply push the button down and it says here takeoff trim push. Okay, left to that we have our engine crank. So with the APU on, battery on, once the APU is spun up, we'll get a green light here. You can select your left and right engine. You'll crank it over to one engine. Once the engine started, the crank switch will automatically return to center. Once it's returned to center, you can click at the opposite direction and start the other engine. Okay, coming over here, we have our volume controls. We have our Vox controls, our ICS, or intercom switch. So if we're talking to the guys on the ground, they're plugged in the aircraft. That's how we would talk to them. We have our RWR, our weapon delivery volume. So weapon delivery would be like your lock tones and things like that. You have your MIDS communication system, both A and B, our TACAN and auxiliary. All right. So then moving over to the next panel here, we have our antenna switches for the COM1 and the IFF antennas. We have our crypto switches for encryption for COM2 and COM1. Here we have our manual ILS channel selector. If we're in manual mode, so you can see you can switch it down to manual or leave it up in UFC. We'll typically always leave it in UFC. Okay, and actually I think I need to correct myself because I think I just misspoke. So give me just a second. I need to confirm something, guys. Okay, no, I was correct. These are encryption switches. So first switch here is for COM1 encrypted radio G transmit switch, and the next one here to the right is, or excuse me, this one is the encrypted relay switch. The one on the right here is our encrypted radio G transmit switch. Like anybody's going to remember that because I have no idea what the heck that is. Up here, it's not modeled, but you would have your ALE39 countermeasures dispenser set reset switch. And then coming down here to the bottom, these three guys here, you have your IFF identify friend or foe crypto switch. In the middle here, we have our IFF mode 4 switch. And then finally, the master switch, norm or emergency, which again, you'll always leave it norm. Back here, you have your OBOGS switch, or onboard oxygen generating system. So before takeoff, you'd always want to make sure we flip that in the on position to supply oxygen to the pilot so we don't go out to hypoxia. Now, if we turn all the way back here, the last ones that we have here, you have a fuel flow rotary. You don't ever really need to mess with that. But back here you have your hydraulic isolate switch. So if you needed to switch it between override, which hydraulic circuit 2B isolation is overridden to allow in-flight recharging of the APU accumulator or normal mode. Again, never found a reason to come back here. And then finally, this guy back here is our nuke weapon switch, which currently is not modeled in DCS World. All right. So that pretty much sums it up for the cockpit tour, guys. I think the only thing actually I did forget was the canopy here. So to close the canopy, you come down to the switch here, left click and hold to drop the canopy. The canopy will come down, hit the rails, and then you hold it until it pushes all the way forward and locks into position. And then to open it, you just have to right click it once and the canopy will come open. Okay, and sorry, one more thing that I almost forgot here is the countermeasure system. So here we have the ALR-67, or early warning radar receiver for the F-18C Hornet. We have our ECM, or electronic countermeasures rotary. We have our dispenser switch. The dispenser switch allows us to either activate a program by flipping the on position with the master arm also armed. Forward for the chaff will activate program 1, and there's a total of 5 programs, I believe, stored in the computer. And program or flares, the aft position will dispense the or activate program 5. If we go into bypass, the forward dispense switch will activate the chaff, and rear activate the flare. Then we have our cabin pressure, and finally an auxiliary release. Okay, which again, this one is another one that I've never had to use, and I don't know that there is a reason to for DCS, but I could be mistaken on that. Alright, so that is the Overkill cockpit tour for the F-18C Hornet. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, hit the bell for future notifications, because there's going to be a lot more coming from the F-18, almost said 15, and it's going to be coming out very quickly. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoy this. We'll talk to you on the next one. Have a good night.